Welcome to Real Paranormal Activity, the network. Entertainment you'll enjoy.
You are listening to an RPA production, where people gather. LaFosse Corporation, LLC.
The world is full of mysteries. It's full of strangeness. And it exists with oddities. That's what we do on this show. We examine the strangeness, the mysterious, the oddities. This is Terry's Mysterious Moments, and I am your presenter, Terry from Texas. This is Season 8. Welcome if it's your first time. Welcome back if you've been here before. Go with us on this trip while we look at cryptids like Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, and maybe even Thunderbirds. Be with us while we examine stories of legends such as werewolves, vampires, witches, ghosts, and hauntings. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Terry's Mysterious Moments. I am your presenter, Terry from Texas. Ghost stories. Everybody likes ghost stories for the most part. Some ghost stories are funny. Some ghost stories are downright scary. Some make you think. Others are too outlandish to believe. A ghost story is any piece of fiction or drama that includes a ghost, or simply takes as a premise the possibility of ghosts or characters' belief in them. It doesn't actually have to be a ghost, but if someone believes it, it's a ghost story. Linked to the ghost is the idea of a haunting, where a supernatural entity is tied to a place, object, or person. Ghost stories are commonly examples of ghost lore. The term ghost story can refer to any kind of scary story. In a narrower sense, the ghost story has been developed as a short story format within genre fiction. It is a form of supernatural fiction and specifically of weird fiction, and is often a horror story. They have been written to serve all sorts of purposes, from comedy to morality tales, and ghosts often appear in the narrative as sentinels or prophets of things to come. A widespread belief concerning ghosts is that they're composed of a misty, airy, or subtle material. Anthropologists link this idea to early beliefs that ghosts were the person within the person, most noticeable in ancient cultures as a person's breath, which upon exhaling in colder climates appears visibly as a white mist. Belief in ghosts is found in all cultures around the world, and thus ghost stories may be passed down orally or in written form. One of the favorite kinds of ghost stories is a campfire story, a form of oral storytelling, usually involving axe murderers lurking in the dark. In my case, I was telling stories about vampire toads that would fall out of trees and bite people on the neck. It wasn't a ghost story, but some of the stories are decades, if not centuries old, with varying versions across multiple cultures. Many schools and educational institutions encourage ghost storytelling as part of literature. In 1929, 5 key features of the English ghost story were identified in Some Remarks on Ghost Stories by M.R. James, who was a well-known ghost story type writer. As summarized by Frank Kaufman for course in popular imaginative literature, they were this. The introduction of pulp magazines in the early 1900s created new avenues for such stories to be published, and they began to appear in publications such as Good Housekeeping and The New Yorker. A list of certain ghost stories almost every year. Ghosts in the classical world often appeared in the form of vapor or smoke, but at other times they were described as being substantial, complete with the wounds that killed them. And you see that in the TV show Ghosts that's running on CBS now. Spirits of the dead appear in literature as early as Homer's Odyssey, which features a journey to the underworld and the hero encountering the ghosts of the dead, as well as the Old Testament, in which the Witch of Endor calls up the spirit of the prophet Samuel to talk to King Saul. The play Mostellaria by the Roman playwright Plautus is the earliest known work to feature a haunted dwelling, and is sometimes translated as the haunted house. Another early account of a haunted place comes from an account by Pliny the Younger. He describes the haunting of a house in Athens by a ghost bound in chains, an archetype that would become familiar in later literature. Ghosts often appeared in the tragedies of the Roman writer Seneca, who would later influence the revival of tragedy on the Renaissance stage, particularly Thomas Kyd and Shakespeare. The 1001 Nights, sometimes known as the Arabian Nights, contains a number of ghost stories, often including jinn, also ghouls and corpses. In particular, the tale of Ali the Kharin and the haunted house in Baghdad revolves around a house haunted by jinns. Other medieval Arabic literature, such as the Encyclopedia of the Brethren of Purity, also contain ghost stories. The 11th century Japanese work, The Tale of Genji, contains ghost stories and includes characters being possessed by spirits. During the English Renaissance in the mid-16th century, the works of Seneca were rediscovered by Italian humanists, and they became the models of the revival of tragedy. Seneca's influence is particularly evident in Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy and Shakespeare's Hamlet, both of which share a revenge theme, a corpse-strewn climax, and ghosts among the cast. The ghost in Richard III also resemble the Senecan model, while the ghost in Hamlet plays a more complex role. The shade of Hamlet's murdered father in Hamlet has become one of the more recognizable ghosts in English literature. In another of Shakespeare's works, Macbeth, the murdered Banquo returns as a ghost to the dismay of the title character. In English Renaissance theater, ghosts were often depicted with the garb of the living and even in armor. Armor, being out of date by the time of the Renaissance, gave the stage ghost a sense of antiquity. The sheeted ghost began to gain ground on the stage in the 1800s because an armored ghost had to be moved about by complicated pulley systems or lifts, and eventually became cliched stage elements and objects of ridicule. Anne Jones and Peter Stollybrass, in Renaissance Clothing and the Materials of Memory, point out, in fact, it is as laughter increasingly threatens the ghost that he starts to be staged not in armor, but in some form of spirit drapery. A lot of the stories that we hear talk about a lady in white wandering around a home or property or just appearing. And many others have the ghosts appearing in modern clothing, whatever would be suitable for their time of life. An interesting observation by Jones and Stollybrass is that at the historical point of which ghosts themselves become increasingly implausible, at least to an educated elite, to believe in them at all seems to be necessary to assert their immateriality or their invisibility. The drapery of ghosts must now, indeed, be as spiritual as the ghosts themselves. This is a striking departure from the ghosts of the Renaissance stage and from the Greek and Roman theatrical ghosts upon which that stage drew. The most prominent features of Renaissance ghosts is precisely their gross materiality. They appear to us conspicuously clothed. In Spain, the legend of Catalina Lercaro stands out, a young woman from the 16th century who committed suicide so as not to have to marry a man she did not love. From here, many people claim to see her ghost. Ghost figured prominently in traditional British ballads of the 16th and 17th centuries, particularly the border ballads of the turbulent border country between England and Scotland. Ballads of this type include The Unquiet Grave, The Wife of Usher's Well, and Sweet William's Ghost, which feature the recurring theme of returning dead lovers or children. In the ballad King Henry, a particularly ravenous ghost devours the king's horse and hounds before forcing the king into bed. The king then awakens to find the ghost transformed into a beautiful woman. The Flying Dutchman was a ghost ship that became the subject of many ghost stories and still remains as a good subject. One of the key early appearances of ghosts was The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole in 1764, considered to be the first Gothic novel. A lot of Gothic literature deals with spirits and ghosts and whatever. Although the ghost story shares the use of the supernatural with the Gothic novel, the two forms are different. Ghost stories, unlike Gothic fiction, usually take place in a time and location near to the audience of the story. The modern short story emerged in Germany in the early decades of the 19th century. Kleist's The Beggar Woman of Locarno, published in 1810, and several other works from the period lay claim to being the first ghost short stories of a modern type. E.T.A. Hoffmann's ghost stories include The Elementary Spirit and The Milnes of Falun. The Russian equivalent of the ghost story is the Balichka. Notable examples of this genre from the 1830s include Gogol's Vlei and Pushkin's Queen of Spades. Although there were scores of other stories from lesser-known writers, produced primarily as Christmas fiction, oddly enough, the Vosges mountain range is a setting for the most ghost stories by the French writing team of Erckmann Chatrian. One of the earliest writers of ghost stories in English was Sir Walter Scott. His ghost stories, Wandering Willie's Tale, in 1824 was first published as part of Red Gauntlet, and The Tapestry Chamber eschewed the Gothic style of writing and helped set an example for later writers in this genre. Historian of the ghost story Jack Sullivan has noted that many literary critics argue that a golden age of the ghost story existed between the decline of the Gothic novel in the 1830s and the start of the First World War. Sullivan argues that the work of Edgar Allan Poe and Sheridan Le Fanu invigorated this golden age. Irish author Sheridan Le Fanu was one of the most influential writers of ghost stories. Le Fanu's collections, such as In a Glass Darkly, produced in 1872, and the Purcell Papers, produced in 1880, helped to popularize the short story as a medium for ghost fiction. Charlotte Riddell, who wrote fiction as Mrs. J.H. Riddell, created ghost stories which were noted for adept use of the haunted house theme. The classic ghost story arose during the Victorian period and included authors such as M.R. James, Sheridan Le Fanu, Violet Hunt, and Henry James. Classic ghost stories were influenced by the Gothic fiction tradition and contain elements of folklore and psychology. M.R. James summed up the essential elements of the ghost story as malevolence and terror, the glare of evil faces, the stony grin of unearthly malice, pursuing forms in darkness and long-drawn, distant screams, and all in place, and so is a modicum of blood, shed with deliberation and carefully husbanded. Famous literary apparitions from the Victorian period are the ghosts of A Christmas Carol, in which Ebenezer Scrooge is helped to see the error of his life ways by the ghost of the former colleague Jacob Marley, and the ghosts of Christmas Past, Christmas Present, and Christmas Yet to Come. In a precursor to A Christmas Carol, Dickens published The Story of the Goblins Who Stole a Sexton. Dickens also wrote The Signal Man, another work featuring ghosts. David Langford has described British author M.R. James as writing the 20th century's most influential canon of ghost stories. James perfected a method of storytelling which has become known as Jamesian, which involved abandoning many of the traditional Gothic elements of his predecessors. The classic Jamesian tale usually includes the following elements: a characterful setting in an English village, seaside town, or country estate, or an ancient town in France, Denmark, or Sweden, or a venerable abbey or university, a nondescript and rather naive gentleman scholar as protagonist, the discovery of an old book or other antiquarian object that somehow unlocks, calls down the wrath, or at least attracts the unwelcome attention of a supernatural menace, usually from beyond the grave. According to James, the story must put the reader into the position of saying to himself, if I'm not very careful, something of this kind may happen to me. He also perfected the technique of narrating supernatural events through implication and suggestion, letting his reader fill in the blanks and focusing on the mundane details of settings and characters in order to throw the horrific and bizarre elements into a greater relief. He summed up his approach in the foreword to the anthology Ghosts and Marvels. Two ingredients most valuable in the concocting of a ghost story are, to me, the atmosphere and the nicely managed crescendo. Let us, then, be introduced to the actors in a placid way. Let us see them going about their ordinary business, undisturbed by forebodings, pleased with their surroundings. And into this calm environment, let the ominous thing put out its head, unobtrusively at first, and then more insistently until it holds a stage. Another aspect that James considered a requisite, that the ghost should be malevolent or odious. Amiable and helpful apparitions are all very well in fairy tales or in local legends, but I have no use for them in a fictitious ghost story. Despite the suggestion in the essay Stories I Have Tried to Write that writers employ reticence in their work, many of James's tales depict scenes and images of savage and often disturbing violence. So that's the technical part of the ghost story. The better part is the actual telling of the story and the story itself. Depends on where you're from as to how your story will go. Some of them are quite vicious, others are very nice, others are gentle, others are like you just can't believe them at all. But the ghost story can talk about cultures, strange things that have happened in a location, and they're really good for use around a campfire. The stories that I have about ghosts that are real are from my own home. I saw a ghost in my bedroom one night. We have heard others walk through the house. We've heard them talking in the den when we're not in there and nothing's on. And I don't think the cats are holding conversations in English. So first thing about the ghost story at this stage in the story is, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe there could be spirits walking the earth of deceased individuals? Do I believe in spirits? Yeah, I believe in spirits. I believe there are good spirits and there are bad spirits. I particularly like ghost stories that are ghost stories. They're not violent necessarily. They're not very cerebral. They don't have to be. The movies that involve some boogeyman, like Freddy Krueger or Jason from Friday the 13th or Michael Myers, those aren't ghost stories to me, because those are remaining characters. They're alive. I love telling ghost stories. I love listening to ghost stories. It is often said by people that humans enjoy being terrified. Well, some do, some don't. But the ghost story is one of those things that if you tell it right, and if it's a good story, nobody walks away feeling any the worse for it. The campfire type ghost stories, like I said earlier, are the escaped mad killer with a hook on his arm that haunts lovers' lanes and involves teenagers who go down that lovers' lane, and a lot of horror films, not necessarily the ghost stories, but horror films give a message to teenagers that if you're naughty in whatever way, and usually it's if you've had sex before you're married, you're fodder for the killer. They're going to get you. Forget about the girl's father. The killer's going to get you. Ghost stories are a great way to pass time. If you find a good one, personally, I don't care for fictional ghost stories. I like real ghost stories. I've got a series of books up here on my shelf that talk about ghosts of Gettysburg. I think there's 8 books in the series. Different ghost stories from the Battle of Gettysburg during the Civil War. I've got another book that I've had for years called 50 Great Ghost Stories from England. Some beautiful stories in there, and they'll curl your hair and make you sleep with the light on. Others are stories from people who have said, this is what I saw. And yes, I have my own ghost story, at least one, that a woman appeared in my bedroom one night, and it was a flicker, but I saw her. She was there. I haven't seen her since, but I do have a ghost story. And my wife and I share some ghost stories because of, I believe, the property that we live on. Not necessarily our homes, because this is our second home on this property. We've heard voices in the den when we're not in the den and nothing's on in the den. We've heard footsteps walk through my bedroom, walk right between us, and it's very obvious they're footsteps. I've seen shadows in my bathroom move on the walls. She's heard her name being called several times back when I worked nights. So we have our own stories. I have not researched this property. Frankly, I don't know how. I would love to find out what went on back around probably the late 1800s, early 19s. Because I think this may have been a farm or a ranch, and there may have been a killing on it. Well, I don't want to take up too much time because this is a very interesting storyline for me. I hope you've enjoyed the story about ghost stories. I didn't tell any ghost stories except my own. But thanks for being along and listening to Terry's Mysterious Moments. and I hope you'll come back again and listen to more. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you again probably about a week or so. Thanks for being here, y'all. Be careful this week. Bye-bye.